It is a strange thing how culture weaves itself through everything. You see it in the biggest events. You see it in the quietest moments. And sometimes you find it lurking in the shadows and the cold hard facts of crime. Who would think that Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, would show up in criminological studies? It sounds like a joke, but it is not. Think about it. Here is a man who defined an era. His music spoke to millions. His image was everywhere. He challenged norms. He lived a life of immense fame and tragic struggles. He died young, but his shadow stretched long. So, when researchers look at human behavior, at deviant acts, at the very fabric of society and its broken parts, why would Elvis not be there? Sometimes it is direct. A piece of music found at a scene. A phrase from a song in a note. Other times it is subtle. A cultural touchstone for a generation trying to understand a criminal act committed decades ago. Or a way to label a specific kind of behavior. It is not always about Elvis himself being a criminal or a victim, though those angles exist too. It is more about his cultural weight, his undeniable presence. How does the collective memory of a superstar affect how we perceive guilt? Can the allure of an icon lead people down a path of obsession, even crime? Do songs like Jailhouse Rock or Suspicious Minds offer clues, not just entertainment? It might seem far-fetched. It might seem like a stretch. But the human mind is complex. Society is layered. And crime, at its heart, is a human act. So yes, Elvis is there, in some unexpected places, in some serious research. He is a reference point, a symbol, a piece of the puzzle. It makes you wonder what other cultural icons are silently influencing our understanding of crime and justice. What other stories are waiting to be told, where the familiar intersects with the grim reality of human fault? It is a peculiar intersection, but it is real. Number 18. Can a mother's shadow explain criminal apathy? The idea of parental influence on a child's path is a cornerstone of criminological thought. It goes back to early theories. It spans across psychological and sociological perspectives. We talk about broken homes. We talk about absent fathers. But what about the incredibly strong, almost spiritual bond between a mother and her son? Especially when that bond is mythologized, like the one between Elvis Presley and his mother Gladys. This is what a unique study from 2017 touched upon. It did not directly examine Elvis, the man. It used the narrative of his relationship with Gladys as a powerful cultural metaphor. Dr. Eleanor Vance, a sociologist from the University of California, Berkeley, and her team published a paper titled Echoes of Graceland, Maternal Attachment Narratives and Desensitization to Petty Crime. This was in the Journal of Intergenerational Studies. The study was not about Elvis's family specifically. It was about how individuals who report extremely idealized, almost overwhelming positive attachment to a single parent figure in their early life might develop a particular form of emotional detachment later on. They specifically looked at how this detachment might manifest in their attitudes towards minor transgressions, things like shoplifting, small-scale fraud, or vandalism. The researchers interviewed 150 participants from diverse backgrounds. They used a combination of in-depth interviews and psychological assessments. They were looking for patterns. They wanted to see if the intensity of early parental idealization, particularly toward a mother figure, correlated with a reduced sense of moral outrage or empathy when confronted with scenarios involving petty crime. And here is where Elvis came in an unexpected way. During the interview process, many participants, when asked about ideal parent-child relationships, brought up cultural examples. And a surprising number of them, especially those over 50, spontaneously mentioned Elvis and Gladys. They talked about Elvis's devotion. They spoke about his grief after her death. They painted a picture of an almost sacred bond. The researchers realized this narrative was deeply ingrained in the cultural consciousness. It represented an almost impossible ideal of maternal love and filial devotion. The study did not claim that idealizing a mother makes someone a criminal. That would be a wrong reading. Instead, it explored a more nuanced idea. If someone believes that an all-encompassing, pure love like Elvis's for Gladys is the only true form of love, they might struggle to find similar emotional depth in other relationships or situations. This could lead to a kind of emotional flatlining in other areas. Small crimes, lacking the drama, or perceived emotional weight of monumental love or loss might seem less significant. less impactful, they might not trigger the usual moral alarm bells. Dr. Vance's team hypothesized that this idealized love, while beautiful, could paradoxically make individuals less sensitive to the everyday moral failings of others. It was as if their emotional capacity for deep feeling was reserved for these mythic relationships. The study found a weak but statistically significant correlation. Participants who frequently referenced highly idealized parent-child relationships, including the Elvis Gladys narrative, showed slightly lower scores on empathy scales when presented with hypothetical scenarios of minor economic offenses. They were more likely to use phrases like "everyone does it" or "it's not hurting anyone important." The unexpected part was how often the king's devotion to his mother came up as the ultimate example. It was not prompted, it was organic, it showed how powerful a cultural story can be, even in unexpected psychological analyses. The researchers were not looking for Elvis, but there he was, a benchmark of unconditional love, inadvertently shedding light on the complexities of moral apathy. The study concluded that understanding these deeply embedded cultural narratives can help criminologists grasp the subtle ways people rationalize or minimize deviant behavior. It is not about blame, it is about understanding the human psyche and how it processes emotion. What if our deepest emotional anchors unknowingly numb us to certain realities? Could the pursuit of an idealized love make us blind to smaller injustices? How do cultural ideals of devotion shape our perception of minor wrongs, and do we fully understand the psychological trade-offs of such powerful narratives? Are there other celebrity relationships that serve a similar, unnoticed function in our moral landscape? Number 17 was solitary confinement ever softened by You Lonesome Tonight? Imagine being alone, truly alone, for days, weeks, months. That is the reality of solitary confinement. It is designed to be isolating. It is meant to break the spirit, or at least to force introspection. Criminologists and psychologists have studied its effects for decades. They look at mental health, recidivism, and the sheer human cost. But what about the internal world of the confined? How do prisoners maintain their sanity? How do they connect with the outside world, even in their minds? A fascinating, if grim, study from 2005 explored this very question. It was conducted by Dr. Marcus Thorne, a cognitive psychologist, and Dr. Lena Petrova, a correctional therapist, both from the University of Central Florida. Their research, published in the Journal of Correctional Psychology, was titled "Sonic Echoes Cultural Memory as a Coping Mechanism in Extreme Isolation." They interviewed 40 former inmates who had spent significant time over 6 months in solitary confinement units across several state prisons. The goal was to understand their internal coping strategies. What did they think about? Or what did they remember? How did they keep their minds active? The researchers specifically asked about mental exercises, about recollections of external stimuli, about anything that brought a sense of connection or normalcy. And repeatedly across interviews, a striking pattern emerged. Music, not just any music. Specific, well-known songs, often from a particular era, served as mental anchors. They were replayed in the mind, sung silently, recalled note by note, and among these songs, Elvis Presley's You Lonesome Tonight came up with startling frequency, especially among male inmates over the age of 40. This was not the most upbeat song. It was not a rebellious anthem. It was a melancholic ballad. Yet, it was a powerful tool for these men. They would mentally reconstruct the song. The lyrics, the melody, the spoken word part. Some even reported imagining the exact sound of Elvis's voice, as if he were there in the cell with them. Why this particular song? Dr. Thorne and Dr. Petrova theorized several reasons. First, its widespread popularity meant almost everyone knew it. It was a shared cultural artifact. Second, its theme of loneliness and yearning resonated deeply with their isolated state. The lyrics spoke directly to their reality. Are you lonesome tonight? Do you miss me tonight? Are you sorry we drifted apart? These lines, originally about lost love, became reinterpreted. They were about lost freedom, lost connection to family, lost self. One former inmate, a man named Robert L., who had spent 14 months in solitary, described it this way: that song. It became my companion. I'd sing it in my head 1,000 times. Sometimes I'd change the words in my mind just a little to fit my situation. But Elvis's voice was always there. It reminded me of home, of a time when I wasn't so alone. It was sad, yeah, but it was also a comfort. And Robert L. was not a huge Elvis fan outside of prison, but in that cell, the song became his lifeline. The study did not claim that Elvis songs prevented mental illness in solitary. That would be an overstatement, but it highlighted the crucial role of cultural memory in maintaining psychological resilience. The familiar cultural touchstones, especially music, provided a framework. They gave structure to otherwise unstructured time. They offered a way to mentally escape, or at least to process the overwhelming sense of isolation. The researchers concluded that the ability to retrieve and re-engage with deeply ingrained cultural products like a beloved song acted as a protective factor. It helped maintain a sense of identity. It provided a mental escape route. It confirmed that the inmate was still part of a larger human experience even when physically cut off. The unexpected prevalence of Elvis's mournful ballad suggested its profound resonance with the core experience of extreme loneliness. It underscored the power of shared cultural heritage even in the most desolate circumstances. It showed that even in the darkest corners of the human experience, a tune from a long-gone singer could offer a flicker of light. Could prisons use specific cultural materials to aid in mental health coping for inmates in isolation without reducing the security? What other forms of cultural memory might be just as powerful, but are currently overlooked? How does the mind reshape familiar art to fit extreme personal suffering? If a song like You Lonesome Tonight can become a lifeline, what does that say about the psychological needs we fundamentally share, regardless of our circumstances? Okay, I understand. I will continue generating the content for the remaining chapters, following all the specified guidelines, including the reverse numbering and the shocking questions at the end of each segment. I will continue to invent plausible studies and details as requested. Due to the very large word count, 10,000 words, I will generate the next few chapters as a continuation. Please let me know when you would like me to stop or if you have specific chapters you want me to prioritize. Number 16, did the Memphis Mafia inspire modern gang dynamics? When people think of organized crime, they usually picture the mafia or street gangs. They think of hierarchical structures, codes of loyalty, and protection rackets. But what about the informal entourages that surround celebrities, the loyal friends, bodyguards, and hangers on who manage their lives, protect their image, and sometimes indulge their vices? This is where Elvis's Memphis Mafia comes into play, not as a criminal organization itself, but as a sociological case study. A 2011 paper published in the Journal of Celebrity Studies and Deviance titled Beyond the Velvet Rope Celebrity Entourages as Proto-Gang Structures explored this very idea. Dr. Calvin Hurst, a criminologist specializing in youth subcultures at the University of Chicago, led the research. His team looked at the social dynamics, power structures, and perceived loyalty within various celebrity entourages, comparing them to early-stage street gangs or informal criminal groups. The Memphis Mafia, the nickname given to Elvis Presley's inner circle, was a primary historical reference point for the study. It was not because they were criminals. On the contrary, they were largely portrayed as fiercely loyal protectors and friends. But the structure was what interested Dr. Hurst. Elvis was the undisputed leader. His word was law. The members derived status, wealth, and identity from their association with him. They lived a life of luxury, travel, and access that would be impossible without Elvis. In return, they offered absolute loyalty, managed logistics, provided security, and shielded him from the outside world. The study highlighted several parallels. One was the concept of territory. While not a physical block, Elvis's home's Graceland, his Los Angeles residences, and even his stage were territories maintained and controlled by the mafia. Access was strictly regulated. Another parallel was the code of silence. Members were expected to keep Elvis's secrets, protect his image, and present a united front. Infractions against this code often led to expulsion, as seen with the termination of Red and Sonny West, and Dave Hebler, whose tell-all book, Elvis What Happened. He interviewed former members of various celebrity entourages from the 1960s to the 2000s, including some who were tangentially connected to people who knew the Memphis Mafia. He found that the motivations for joining and staying, like access to resources, identity, protection, a sense of belonging, were strikingly similar to those described by individuals joining street gangs in urban areas. The researchers used archival materials, biographies, and interviews from the time to reconstruct the social dynamics of the Memphis Mafia. They noted the gifts Elvis bestowed, cars, money, houses, which cemented loyalty, much like a gang leader might provide resources to his crew. They also observed the was versus them mentality, where the group insulated Elvis from perceived threats media, demanding fans, rival musicians. The unexpected insight was not that the Memphis Mafia was a gang, but that its operational dynamics offered a clear, high-profile example of how a leader-centric group, bound by loyalty, mutual benefit, and an informal code, could form and sustain itself. This provided a framework for criminologists to analyze less visible and often more dangerous informal groups. It showed how charismatic leadership, material incentives, and a shared identity can quickly create a powerful, self-regulating entity that operates outside conventional societal norms. It was a fascinating look at the sociology of power and influence, using the most famous king as a case study. What is the line between a devoted inner circle and a proto-criminal enterprise? Can intense loyalty, fueled by material gain, ever truly be non-coercive? How do societies distinguish between protective group behavior and potentially dangerous insularity in the absence of overt criminal acts? Are the lessons from celebrity entourages applicable to understanding how cults or extremist groups initially formed their bonds? Number 15, was blue suede shoes ever a trophy in a theft? The idea of a trophy in crime is not new. Criminals, especially those involved in, serial offenses or highly symbolic acts, sometimes take items from their victims or crime scenes. These items are not always valuable in a monetary sense. They are valuable for what they represent: power, conquest, or a tangible reminder of the deed. But what about a cultural trophy? An item that holds immense symbolic weight in the broader public consciousness. A peculiar reference to Elvis's blue suede shoes came up in a 1998 case study published in Forensic Psychology Review. The study, led by Dr. Anya Sharma, a forensic psychologist from Scotland Yard's Behavioral Analysis Unit, focused on patterns of fetishism and symbolic theft in property crimes. The paper was titled "Iconic Footwear Symbolic Acquisition in Cases of High-Profile Thefts." The study investigated a series of burglaries that occurred in the early 1990s across the UK. The burglaries were not particularly violent, but they were unusual. The perpetrator, dubbed the Soul Collector by tabloids, would specifically target homes with valuable shoe collections. Not just any shoes, they were often bespoke, designer, or antique footwear. But in one particular case, an antique shop in London, the thief took something else that puzzled investigators for years. Alongside a pair of ornate Victorian boots, the thief stole a framed, limited edition promotional poster for Elvis Presley's Blue Suede Shoes single, released in the UK in 1956. The poster itself was not extremely valuable. It was a collectible, yes, but its monetary worth was far less than other items left untouched. It was the only non-shoe item taken. This anomaly caught Dr. Sharma's attention. She theorized it was a symbolic acquisition, a trophy not of the direct crime itself, but of a deeper psychological need or obsession. The Soul Collector was eventually caught in 1997. During his interrogation and subsequent psychological evaluation, it was revealed he had a profound, almost obsessive fascination with footwear as a symbol of identity and aspiration. He had a meticulous collection of stolen shoes in his flat, all carefully preserved. When asked about the Elvis poster, his response was telling. He stated, somewhat cryptically, they were the shoes that made a king, the shoes that changed everything, and they were blue, like the sadness. Dr. Sharma's interpretation was that the blue suede shoes poster represented the ultimate symbolic shoe. It embodied transformation, fame, and a cultural shift. For a thief whose identity was intertwined with the acquisition of symbolic footwear, this poster was not just a piece of paper. It was the apotheosis of his fetish. It was the ultimate trophy because it transcended mere material value and tapped into a collective cultural mythos surrounding shoes. He could not steal the blue suede shoes, which were themselves legendary and probably non-existent in a single pair. But he could steal the idea of them, represented by a tangible artifact. This unexpected connection to Elvis highlighted how deep cultural symbols can be integrated into deviant behavior. It showed that criminals sometimes operate on a level of symbolic meaning that goes far beyond the surface value of objects. The Blue Suede Shoes were not just a song title, they were a cultural icon representing rebellion, individuality, and ultimately unparalleled stardom. For a psychologically driven thief, this made the poster a priceless acquisition, a crowning jewel in his strange collection. The study concluded that understanding these symbolic dimensions of crime is crucial for profiling and intervention. Could other iconic fashion items or cultural symbols become the target of fetishistic theft? How deeply embedded are popular culture references in the subconscious motivations of certain criminals? If an item's symbolic value outweighs its monetary value for a criminal, what does that tell us about their psychological landscape? What other hidden meanings might be driving seemingly irrational criminal acts that investigators routinely dismiss? Number 14, did its now or never predict impulse control issues? The narrative of Elvis Presley's career is often depicted as a meteoric rise, followed by periods of intense pressure, indulgence, and ultimately a tragic decline. This arc, particularly the focus on immediate gratification and the struggle with long-term consequences, resonated unexpectedly in a 2014 study on impulse control and criminal behavior. The paper, The King's Dilemma: Celebrity Narratives as Illustrative Case Studies in Impulse Control Disorder, appeared in the Journal of Behavioral Criminology. Dr. Julian Vance, a behavioral psychologist at the University of Cambridge, and his team were researching the psychological underpinnings of impulsivity, particularly how it relates to crimes like fraud, substance-related offenses, and sudden acts of violence. They used celebrity biographies and public records, not to diagnose these individuals posthumously, but to analyze readily available narratives as compelling, culturally recognized examples of human behavior. Elvis Presley's story, with its highs and lows, offered a rich public domain case study. The researchers specifically focused on periods in Elvis's life where decisions were made with apparent disregard for future repercussions. His rapid expenditure of wealth, his escalating use of prescription medication, and his often impulsive business dealings or lack thereof, leaving much to Colonel Tom Parker, were analyzed through the lens of impulse control theory. They also looked at quotes attributed to him and song titles that captured a sense of urgency. It's Now or Never was cited multiple times. The study used It's Now or Never as a metaphorical framework. The song itself, a romantic plea, embodies an urgent, seize-the-moment mentality. Dr. Vance argued that this sentiment, when taken to an extreme and applied to all aspects of life, can lead to maladaptive behaviors. For Elvis, it might have translated into his lifestyle choices. For others, it could translate into criminal acts. The researchers conducted a comparative analysis. They examined biographies of public figures known for impulsive behaviors, both those who became criminals and those who did not, and compared them to individuals who demonstrated strong long-term planning and delayed gratification. They then administered surveys and interviews to a group of individuals with documented impulse control issues, some of whom had criminal records. They found that individuals prone to impulsive criminal acts often echoed sentiments similar to the now or never philosophy. They frequently minimized future risks, discounted long-term consequences, and prioritized immediate rewards or emotional relief. One interviewee, a man serving time for serial credit card fraud, stated, "When I saw something I wanted, it was like a switch flipped. The future didn't exist. Just that moment. It was now or never to get what I felt I deserved." This statement, the researchers noted, eerily mirrored the cultural narrative surrounding Elvis's spending habits and indulgences. The study did not suggest Elvis suffered from a diagnosed impulse control disorder, nor that his music promoted criminality. Instead, it used his widely known life story as a powerful, relatable illustration of how a now or never mindset can manifest. It showed how an inability to delay gratification, coupled with access to resources, fame, and money for Elvis, stolen credit cards for the fraudster, can create a destructive feedback loop. The conclusion was that culturally iconic narratives like Elvis's offer valuable, accessible insights into complex psychological phenomena. They allow researchers to ground abstract theories in tangible public examples, making the concepts more understandable. The King's Dilemma served as a compelling case for understanding how the pursuit of immediate gratification, a characteristic symptom of impulse control issues, can lead individuals down paths of self-destruction or, in other contexts, criminal behavior. It was a stark reminder that even the most celebrated lives can hold lessons about our deepest human flaws. If a philosophy of now or never underpins so many impulsive decisions, how can societies better teach delayed gratification? Are there specific cultural narratives that inadvertently promote or normalize impulsive behavior, especially among vulnerable populations? How do we differentiate between healthy spontaneity and destructive impulsivity, particularly in a world that often rewards instant gratification? Could analyzing the decline of other cultural icons offer further insights into the societal factors that exacerbate impulse control challenges? Number 13, What Does in the Ghetto? Tell us about crime and social traps. And Elvis Presley's 1969 hit, In the Ghetto, stands out in his discography. It is a stark, poignant ballad about the cycle of poverty and crime in urban environments. It tells the story of a child born into struggle, who learns to steal and learns to fight, and eventually meets a violent end. This song, far from being just entertainment, has been referenced by criminologists as a powerful, accessible illustration of social disorganization theory and strain theory. A 2008 ethnographic study published in the Journal of Urban Criminology titled Songs of the Streets Cultural Narratives as Data in Understanding Persistent Crime Environments made direct use of In the Ghetto. Dr. Benjamin Morales, a sociologist at the University of California, Los Angeles, and his team conducted fieldwork in several economically distressed urban neighborhoods in Chicago and Detroit. Their aim was to understand how residents, particularly young people, perceive their environment and the forces shaping their lives. They used cultural artifacts, including popular songs, as prompts in focus groups and interviews. They found that In the Ghetto resonated profoundly with many participants, even those who were not direct Elvis fans. It was a familiar melody, but its lyrics struck a chord with their lived experiences. The song spoke to the cyclical nature of poverty, the lack of opportunities, and the ever-present threat of violence. Dr. Morales argued that Elvis's song, released nearly 40 years prior to their study, still encapsulated key tenets of sociological theories on crime. Social disorganization theory, first articulated by Clifford Shaw and Henry McKay in the Chicago School, suggests that crime flourishes in neighborhoods with weak social ties, lack of collective efficacy, and high rates of poverty and residential turnover. In the Ghetto paints this picture vividly, a place where hope struggles to grow, and where institutions fail to provide support. Strain theory, particularly Robert Merton's formulation, proposes that crime arises when there is a disconnect between culturally approved goals like wealth and success and the legitimate means to achieve them. The child in Elvis's song desires a better life, but the concrete jungle offers only limited, illicit pathways. As the song says, as the world turns, a hungry little boy with a runny nose plays in the street as a paper bag flies at his feet, and his mama cries. This imagery of desperation and lack of opportunity directly illustrates the strains that can push individuals towards deviant behavior. The unexpected element was not just that the song was relevant, but how deeply it had permeated the consciousness across generations. Participants, from teenagers to older adults, could articulate the song's meaning and connect it to their own experiences. They described feeling trapped, just like the child in the song. The song became a shared language, a way to talk about systemic issues without resorting to academic jargon. The study concluded that popular culture, when it tackles profound social issues, can serve as invaluable qualitative data for criminologists. It can reflect public understanding, highlight emotional truths, and even provide a framework for discussing complex theories in accessible ways. In the Ghetto was more than a song, it was a cultural mirror reflecting persistent social problems that fuel crime, making it a timeless reference point for those studying the causes of urban delinquency. It showed how a celebrity's voice could give voice to the voiceless. Does the enduring popularity of songs like In the Ghetto indicate a failure of society to address fundamental inequalities or a continuous human need to acknowledge suffering? Can artistic narratives be as powerful as academic papers in driving public awareness and policy change regarding crime? The role do cultural figures play in translating complex sociological theories into understandable realities for the general public? Are there modern songs that equally capture the nuances of current criminological challenges that researchers are overlooking? Number 12, Can Burning Love? Explain arson as symbolic protest. Arson is often seen as a crime of passion, revenge, or financial gain, but sometimes fire is used for symbolic purposes. It is a powerful, destructive force, and its use can be a form of extreme protest or a statement. This is where a surprising connection to Elvis Presley's Burning Love emerged in a 2016 study on expressive arson. The study, Flames of Dissent, the Use of Arson as a semiotic act in political and social protests was published in the International Journal of Arson Investigation. Dr. Helena Kroll, a forensic sociologist from the University of London, examined cases where arson was used not primarily for material damage, but to send a message. Her team analyzed police reports, trial transcripts, and psychological evaluations from over 70 cases of expressive arson across Europe and North America, occurring between 1980 and 2015. One specific case from 1992 in a small town in rural Ohio provided a curious link to Elvis. A local community center, which was slated for demolition to make way for a new commercial development, was set ablaze. No one was hurt, and the building was already condemned. But inside the charred remains, investigators found something odd: a half-burned vinyl record of Elvis Presley's Burning Love, positioned conspicuously on a melted speaker. The perpetrator, a 23-year-old local activist named Michael R., was apprehended a few days later. During his interrogation, he explained his actions. He was protesting what he saw as the destruction of local community spirit and culture for corporate greed. He chose the community center because it had hosted local dances, concerts, and gatherings for decades, embodying the town's history. In the record, Michael R. explained that Burning Love represented his burning love for his community and his burning anger at its destruction. He said, "Elvis was about the common man, his music was for everyone, and they were just tearing down everything for profit. I wanted to show him that some things, some loves, burn hot. They don't just fade away quietly." He saw Elvis as a symbol of authentic grassroots culture, something he felt was being erased by soulless commercialism. And Dr. Kroll's study highlighted this case as a prime example of semiotic arson, where the act of burning and the objects involved are intended to convey specific, often complex messages. The choice of burning love was not random. It amplified Michael R.'s message, transforming a simple act of property destruction into a performance of protest, deeply embedded with cultural symbolism. The song in this context became a literal soundtrack to his defiance. The researchers concluded that understanding the symbolic language of arsonists can provide critical insights into their motivations and broader social grievances. It is not always about monetary gain or simple malice. Sometimes the fire is meant to illuminate a perceived injustice, using familiar cultural touchstones to make its point. Burning Love, a song originally about passionate romance, was reappropriated into an anthem of passionate social protest, illustrating the versatility of cultural references in criminal acts. It was a powerful demonstration of how art can be twisted or perhaps recontextualized in acts of defiance. How often are acts of arson driven by symbolic rather than material motives, and how accurately are these motives assessed by investigators? Can popular music inadvertently provide a script or vocabulary for expressing extreme emotions, including anger and protest, in destructive ways? What responsibility, if any, do artists or cultural products bear when their work is appropriated in unexpected or deviant contexts? Are there other instances where a song's title or lyrics have become a literal manifesto for a criminal act that we are not recognizing? Number 11 was Return to Sender, a blueprint for mail fraud. And mail fraud is a pervasive and often financially devastating crime, particularly targeting vulnerable populations like the elderly. While scammers use various tactics, but a common thread is leveraging familiar, trustworthy, or emotionally resonant themes to trick victims. And sometimes even seemingly innocuous cultural references, like an Elvis song title, can provide a subtle layer of plausibility or irony. A 2003 report by the U.S. Postal Inspection Service, later analyzed in a research paper titled "The King's Con Pop Culture References in Scams Targeting Seniors," detailed a fascinating, if disturbing, trend. Dr. Olivia Chen, a social psychologist and expert in consumer fraud at George Mason University, contributed to the analysis, which was published in the Journal of Elder Abuse and Neglect in 2007. The paper focused on how fraudsters exploit cultural touchstones to build rapport or create misleading narratives. One specific type of scam involving Elvis Presley memorabilia was highlighted. This was not a scam where the fraudster claimed to be Elvis. Instead, they would target elderly Elvis fans, claiming to have lost or misdirected rare Elvis artifacts, autographed photos, personal letters, or even purported pieces of his clothing. They would send official-looking letters, often poorly drafted but with official-sounding jargon, to potential victims. These letters would claim that for a small processing fee or recovery charge, the victim could help retrieve these items and receive a reward, or even keep a piece of memorabilia. The critical, unexpected twist was the frequent, almost casual, use of the phrase return to sender in these letters. It was often embedded in the instructions for where to send the recovery fee, or as a warning about what would happen if the fee wasn't sent. Otherwise, the item will be returned to sender. This phrase, iconic from Elvis's 1962 hit song, created a subtle, almost subliminal connection for the target audience. For elderly Elvis fans, it was a familiar, comforting phrase. It subconsciously lent an air of authenticity or familiarity to what was, in fact, a crude scam. Dr. Chen's analysis revealed that the fraudsters likely used this phrase intentionally. It served several purposes. First, it acted as a filter. Only those familiar with the song, predominantly the older generation who were prime targets for such scams, would recognize it. Second, it created a small positive cognitive connection. It was a familiar, non-threatening piece of their shared cultural memory. This could subtly lower their guard. Third, it mimicked a bureaucratic official tone despite its pop culture origin. Return to sender is a real postal instruction which added a layer of deceptive legitimacy. The Postal Inspection Service estimated that this particular variant of mail fraud, often targeting Elvis fans, defrauded thousands of individuals of small amounts of money, typically between $50 and $200 per incident, totaling hundreds of thousands of dollars over several years. The victims, often lonely and nostalgic, were not just losing money, they were losing a piece of their trust and connection to their cultural hero. The study concluded that understanding the cultural literacy of specific victim demographics is crucial for fraud prevention. Scammers are adept at exploiting not just financial vulnerabilities, but also emotional and cultural ones. The return to sender scam was a chilling example of how a beloved cultural touchstone could be weaponized, not through direct malice, but through a cunning understanding of a specific generation's emotional attachments and familiarity. It was a stark reminder that even the king's legacy was not safe from exploitation. How many seemingly innocent cultural phrases are being exploited by criminals in subtle ways to gain trust? What other iconic song titles or celebrity catchphrases might be weaponized in future scams targeting specific age groups or demographics? Are there ethical responsibilities for popular culture creators to consider the potential for misuse of their work in criminal contexts? How do law enforcement agencies train their personnel to identify and deconstruct these culturally embedded criminal tactics? Number 10 was a little less conversation, a little more action, a guide for interrogators. Police interrogation is a delicate dance. It involves establishing rapport, asking questions, and sometimes pushing for answers. The language used, the atmosphere created, and the subtle psychological tactics employed can make all the difference. In an unexpected turn, a 2006 communication studies paper published in the Journal of Police and Criminal Psychology explored how iconic cultural phrases might be used by interrogators to build rapport or subtly influence a subject. The paper, titled "The Soundtrack of Confession Pop Culture Proverbs in Interrogation Techniques," was authored by Dr. Raymond Cho, a linguist and former police consultant from the University of California, San Diego. His research involved analyzing transcripts of police interrogations, observing training sessions, and interviewing veteran interrogators about their communication strategies. Dr. Cho was looking for instances where interrogators used common idioms, proverbs, or pop culture references to break the ice, establish common ground, or subtly guide the conversation. And he found a recurring, though often subtle, use of phrases that seemed to draw from popular song lyrics or movie quotes. One specific Elvis reference stood out: a little less conversation, a little more action. This phrase from Elvis's 1968 song was often used by interrogators in a specific context. Not in a direct quoting Elvis way, but as an implied sentiment. After a suspect had given a long, rambling, or evasive answer, an interrogator might lean forward and say something like, "Look, we've been talking for a while, and there's been a lot of conversation, but what we need now is some real action, some real answers." Or, let's cut to the chase. Less talk, more truth. What actually happened? Dr. Cho's analysis suggested this phrase, or its underlying sentiment, worked on multiple levels. For suspects who grew up with Elvis's music, it was a familiar cadence. It was not a direct command, but a culturally recognized way of saying, "get to the point." It could subtly imply that the interrogator was also tired of vague answers, creating a sense of shared frustration that could paradoxically build a minor bond. It also carried an implicit message: it is time to stop stalling and start cooperating. The phrase, in its original context, encouraged decisive action, and interrogators leveraged that underlying meaning. He interviewed several interrogators who admitted to using such phrases intuitively. One veteran detective in Los Angeles said, you pick up on what works. Sometimes you just need to cut through the BS, and if you can do it with something that sounds familiar, that doesn't sound like a threat, it's more effective. You're trying to get them to act, to confess, not just to talk circles. He did not realize he was channeling Elvis, but the sentiment was the same. The study concluded that interrogators often subconsciously tap into a shared cultural lexicon to manage the dynamics of the interrogation room. These subtle references, including those from popular music like Elvis's, can be powerful tools. They can shape the tone, influence perception, and potentially move a hesitant suspect towards a confession. It was not about playing Elvis records in the interrogation room. It was about leveraging the ingrained cultural meaning of his words. It showed how deeply embedded popular culture is in our communication, even in high-stakes situations. Do police training programs formally acknowledge or teach the use of cultural references in interrogation, or is it largely an intuitive, learned behavior? What are the ethical implications of using widely recognized phrases in a way that might subtly manipulate a suspect's perception? Are there specific cultural references that could inadvertently create false confessions by subjects trying to please an interrogator? How can suspects be made aware of these subtle psychological tactics if they are designed to be almost imperceptible? Number 9. Does the Graceland Burglary Index reveal celebrity vulnerabilities? The homes of celebrities are often seen as fortresses, protected by high walls, security systems, and guards. Yet they are frequently targeted by burglars, both opportunistic and those seeking specific high-value items or symbolic trophies. Graceland, Elvis Presley's iconic home in Memphis, offers a fascinating historical perspective on this phenomenon. While Graceland itself has been largely secure in modern times, the idea of it and the security challenges it faced at different points contributed to a unique comparative study. A 2013 paper, The King's Castle Graceland's Legacy and the Evolution of Celebrity Home Security, was published in the Journal of Property Crime Prevention. Dr. Evelyn Reed, a security consultant and criminologist from John Jay College of Criminal Justice, spearheaded the research. The study did not analyze actual burglaries at Graceland in its fully secured museum state. Instead, it used Graceland as a historical index case to compare celebrity home security before and after its extensive post-Elvis death upgrades, and to compare it to other celebrity residences over several decades. Before Elvis's death in 1977, and in the immediate chaotic aftermath, Graceland faced numerous security challenges. There were trespassers, obsessed fans, and even credible threats. Stories abound of fans trying to scale walls or sneak onto the property. While not always successful, these incidents highlighted the unique vulnerability of celebrity homes. Dr. Reed's team painstakingly researched memoirs, news reports, and anecdotal accounts from former Graceland staff and security personnel to reconstruct the security landscape of the estate during Elvis's lifetime. They then compared this data to the modern, highly fortified Graceland Museum and to other celebrity homes. The Graceland Burglary Index, a conceptual tool developed for the study, measured not actual burglaries, but the perceived and actual threats to the property, the security measures in place, and the public's fascination with unauthorized access. It was a comparative metric showing how celebrity homes transitioned from relatively porous estates to high-tech fortresses. The study found a direct correlation between media saturation and celebrity visibility and the level of threat. Elvis, as the most famous man in the world for a period, was a magnet for attention, both benign and malign. The sheer volume of people drawn to Graceland, even just to look, created opportunities for those with ill intent. The lack of standardized, professional security protocols in many celebrity homes of the mid-20th century, Graceland included, contrasted sharply with today's sophisticated defenses. The unexpected insight was how Elvis's open-door policy to friends and family within Graceland inadvertently created security vulnerabilities that would be unthinkable today. The constant flow of people, while a testament to his generosity, made it harder to monitor genuine threats. The study highlighted that the Coast of Fame includes a perpetual battle against intrusion, and Graceland served as an early, high-profile example of this ongoing struggle. Dr. Reed's paper concluded that the evolution of security at Graceland, from a relatively accessible home to a rigorously controlled museum, mirrored a broader trend in celebrity protection. It demonstrated that unique factors, a public obsession, symbolic value, and the inherent vulnerability of high-profile targets end up makes celebrity homes distinct from other residential properties in terms of crime prevention. Graceland, though rarely burglarized in its modern form, remains a crucial historical touchstone for understanding the intersection of fame, property, and crime. How much of celebrity home security is genuinely about preventing crime, and how much is about managing public access and privacy? Do the security measures around iconic celebrity homes inadvertently create new forms of crime, such as sophisticated hacking or drone surveillance? What ethical considerations arise when a private residence becomes a public monument, impacting its vulnerability to illicit entry? Can historical case studies like Graceland offer predictive models for protecting future celebrity residences from evolving criminal threats? Number 8. Do Viva Las Vegas events cause crime spikes? Las Vegas and Elvis Presley are inseparable in the public imagination. His residencies at the International Hotel, later the Las Vegas Hilton in the late 1960s and 1970s, defined an era for both the king and the city. Even today, Elvis impersonators are ubiquitous, and Elvis-themed events draw thousands of fans. This strong cultural link led a group of researchers to investigate a fascinating question. Do major Elvis-themed events or anniversaries in Las Vegas correlate with discernible spikes in local crime rates? A 2009 study, The King's Shadow Elvis Impersonator Conventions and Deviants in Las Vegas, was published in the Journal of Leisure and Criminal Behavior. Dr. David Chung, an urban sociologist from the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and his team conducted a statistical analysis of crime data in Las Vegas. They focused on property crimes, theft, vandalism, and minor public order offenses, disorderly conduct, public intoxication, during periods surrounding major Elvis-themed events from 1995 to 2008. These included annual Elvis festivals, large impersonator conventions, and significant anniversary dates related to Elvis's life and death. The premise was straightforward. Large gatherings of people, especially tourists, often create increased opportunities for certain types of crime. Pickpockets target crowds. Drunkenness can lead to altercations. Vandalism can occur. The researchers wanted to see if Elvis-specific events had a distinct signature in the crime statistics, given the unique demographic and atmosphere often associated with Elvis fans and impersonators. They compared crime rates during these event periods to baseline rates for similar non-event periods, adjusting for general tourism fluctuations. And they found some intriguing, if not dramatic, correlations. There was a statistically significant, albeit modest, increase in petty theft and public intoxication reports in the direct vicinity of major Elvis event venues during these times. The increase was typically around 5 to 8% for these specific categories. The unexpected finding was not the existence of a crime spike, but its nature. Unlike other large conventions, e.g. trade shows, sports events, which sometimes saw increases in more serious property crimes or even violent incidents, the Elvis-related spikes were overwhelmingly concentrated in minor, opportunistic offenses. There was no significant increase in burglaries, vehicle theft, or violent crime. It suggested a particular demographic and behavioral pattern associated with these events. Dr. Chung theorized that the demographic drawn to major Elvis events often included older individuals, making them potential targets for pickpockets and a general celebratory, often alcohol-fueled, atmosphere that could lead to minor public order issues. The study also noted anecdotal evidence from local law enforcement, which reported an increase in lost and found items and complaints about noise, further supporting the idea of a generally good-natured, but sometimes careless, crowd. The conclusion of the study was that while Elvis events contributed to a minor, predictable uptick in certain types of crime, they did not pose a significant threat to public safety in Las Vegas. Instead, they highlighted how specific cultural events, with their unique demographics and atmospheres, can create predictable patterns of opportunistic deviance. Viva Las Vegas, the song of celebration and carefree indulgence, inadvertently became the backdrop for a subtle criminological observation about the predictable human patterns in a city designed for escape. It showed that even the most joyous gatherings can create unexpected opportunities for illicit activity. Do other specific cultural festivals or fan conventions similarly generate predictable, demographic-specific crime patterns that are currently understudied? How do cities prepare for and mitigate these minor, yet consistent crime spikes around major cultural events without stifling community engagement? Could leveraging an understanding of event-specific crime demographics lead to more targeted, less intrusive policing strategies? What broader implications does this have for event planning and urban security in cities heavily reliant on tourism and cultural attractions? Number 7, can't help falling in love with a criminal. The concept of hybristophilia, the attraction to individuals who have committed heinous crimes, is a niche but disturbing area of criminology. But what about a broader, more subtle form of attraction where the charisma, rebellious image, or outsider status of a criminal figure evokes a response that might echo the intense fandom for a celebrity? This is where Elvis, with his early rebel image and later tragic allure, became a point of discussion in a surprising study. A 2018 paper, From Icon to Outlaw Parasocial Relationships and the Charisma of Deviance, was published in the Journal of Social Psychology and Criminal Behavior. By Dr. Sarah Jenkins, a social psychologist from the University of Chicago, explored the psychological mechanisms behind attraction to bad boys or charismatic criminals. She specifically looked at how long-standing cultural archetypes of rebellious figures, like the early Elvis, might influence individuals' perceptions and attractions towards real-life deviance. The study did not claim that Elvis fans are attracted to criminals. That would be an oversimplification. Instead, it explored the shared psychological roots of attraction to certain types of charisma. Dr. Jenkins argued that figures like early Elvis, with his suggestive gyrations, rebellious attitude, and rejection of conservative norms, tapped into a powerful human fascination with the forbidden. He was charismatic precisely because he pushed boundaries. The research involved surveying 300 participants, asking them about their attractions to various archetypes, including the rebel, the misunderstood genius, and the dangerous stranger. Participants were also asked to describe historical or cultural figures who embodied these archetypes. While many named fictional characters, a significant number of older participants, when describing the rebel archetype, referenced Elvis Presley, particularly his 1950s persona. They described his raw energy, his perceived danger, and his undeniable charm. The study then presented participants with carefully constructed profiles of fictional individuals, some of whom had committed minor, non-violent crimes, e.g., petty theft, vandalism related to social protest, but who possessed charismatic traits often associated with the rebel archetype. Participants were asked to rate their attraction to these individuals. The findings showed a slight but statistically significant preference for rebel profiles, even when minor criminal acts were involved, especially among individuals who strongly identified with the rebel archetype in general. Dr. Jenkins drew a parallel. The intense, almost parasocial relationship fans often developed with Elvis was, in part, fueled by his rebellious image. This image, while benign in Elvis's case, tapped into a primal fascination with transgression. Her theory was that for some individuals, this fascination could be misdirected or amplified when encountering real-life figures who embodied similar outsider charisma, even if they were criminals. The line between admiring a rebellious artist and being attracted to a rebellious criminal, though clear to most, could be subtly blurred for a vulnerable few. The unexpected connection to Elvis was how his early persona served as a common, culturally recognized touchstone for rebel charisma. He was the archetype. The study suggested that understanding the historical evolution of these archetypes and how figures like Elvis shaped them can provide insights into the psychology of attraction to deviant individuals. It was a fascinating exploration of how our cultural heroes, even innocently, contribute to the landscape of human attraction and its darker permutations. How do cultural narratives about rebellious charm inadvertently normalize or romanticize certain types of deviant behavior? What responsibility do media and cultural creators have in portraying figures of rebel charisma without inadvertently glamorizing criminality? Are there gender differences in the attraction to outlaw archetypes, and how might Elvis's male persona factor into that? Can understanding the nuances of parasocial relationships help intervene when they veer towards unhealthy attractions to criminals? Number 6 was the hound dog theory, a real fugitive tracking method. In the annals of law enforcement, there are always unique, sometimes unconventional methods developed to track fugitives. These can range from sophisticated data analysis to more intuitive street-smart approaches. A legendary, though largely unconfirmed, piece of FBI lore involving Elvis Presley's hound dog title once circulated among federal agents. This anecdote, however, eventually found its way into a surprising criminological discussion. A 2001 academic paper, Folklore and Forensics, Urban Legends as Analytical Tools in Criminal Justice Education, was published in the Journal of Law Enforcement Pedagogy. Dr. Kenneth Miller, a professor of criminal justice at Arizona State University, explored how professional anecdotes and even urban legends within law enforcement communities could serve as teaching tools. He argued that these stories, even if apocryphal, often contain distilled wisdom or illustrate particular investigative principles. One such urban legend Dr. Miller discussed was the hound dog theory. This was not a formal FBI methodology, nor was it ever officially documented. It was a piece of internal jargon. The story went that in the late 1960s or early 1970s, a seasoned FBI agent, frustrated by a particularly elusive fugitive, remarked, "This guy is like a hound dog. He keeps going back to the same old places, sniffing around for what he knows. We just need to figure out his favorite tree." Another agent familiar with Elvis's music jokingly responded, "So, we got to figure out his hound dog spots." The nickname stuck. The hound dog theory became a shorthand for the principle of pattern-based predictive tracking, the idea that fugitives, like humans in general, are creatures of habit. They will often return to familiar haunts, old associates, or places that provide them with comfort, resources, or a sense of normalcy. Even when on the run, people tend to gravitate towards what is known. The theory, though playfully named after Elvis's hit, emphasized systematic analysis of a fugitive's past behaviors, relationships, and preferences to predict their likely movements. Dr. Miller's paper highlighted this theory not as a scientific breakthrough, but as an excellent pedagogical example. It illustrated a core investigative concept. Criminal profiling often involves understanding behavioral patterns, not just physical evidence. The Elvis reference, while informal, made the concept memorable and relatable for new recruits. It taught them to think like a hound dog, to identify a fugitive's deeply ingrained habits and emotional anchors. The unexpected element was the sheer persistence of this informal theory within certain circles of law enforcement. It was a testament to the power of cultural references to simplify complex ideas. While no FBI agent was literally hunting for a fugitive by listening to Elvis, the song's title provided an effective, memorable metaphor for a very real and important investigative strategy, understanding and predicting habitual behavior. It demonstrated how even a pop song could inspire a pragmatic approach to a grim task. How many other informal, culturally named theories or strategies exist within law enforcement that are not formally documented? Can the use of such playful, informal names for serious investigative principles sometimes trivialize their importance or make them seem less rigorous? Are there ethical considerations in applying animal-based metaphors like hound dog to human fugitives, even if for pedagogical purposes? Could openly studying these informal theories lead to new legitimate investigative approaches by understanding how seasoned professionals intuitively frame their work? Year number 5, are suspicious minds more reliable witnesses? Your witness credibility is a constant challenge in the justice system. Human memory is fallible, influenced by emotion, suggestion, and the passage of time. But what about individuals who are naturally more skeptical, more prone to suspicion? Does a suspicious mind lead to more accurate recall, or does it distort memory in other ways? A peculiar study from 2010 explored this using Elvis Presley's song Suspicious Minds as a conceptual framework for a specific type of cognitive bias. The paper, The Suspicious Minds, Hypothesis, Skepticism, and Recall in Witness Testimony, was published in the Journal of Applied Cognitive Psychology. Dr. Lisa Tran, a cognitive psychologist at the University of Toronto, and her team designed an experiment to test how a general disposition towards skepticism impacts memory recall, especially in high-stress or ambiguous situations. They recruited 200 participants and administered a personality questionnaire to assess their baseline levels of suspicion, cynicism, and critical thinking. They then had participants watch a short, staged video depicting a minor crime, e.g., a purse snatching in a public park. The video contained several ambiguous details and some deliberate inconsistencies. After viewing the video, participants were asked to recall details and identify the culprit from a lineup. The suspicious minds hypothesis, as articulated by Dr. Tran, suggested that individuals with a higher propensity for skepticism might be less susceptible to misleading information or post-event suggestion. They might be more likely to notice inconsistencies and thus provide more accurate, albeit potentially less complete initial testimonies. The song Suspicious Minds, with its lyrics about doubt, distrust, and the erosion of trust we can't go on together with suspicious minds, served as a cultural touchstone for this particular cognitive state. The results were nuanced. Participants who scored high on suspicion scales were indeed less likely to incorporate deliberately misleading information introduced by the experimenters after the video viewing. For example, if a leading question implied the thief wore a red hat when they actually wore a blue one, skeptical individuals were more likely to correct the interviewer or state they did not remember. In this sense, their recall was more resistant to external influence. However, the study also found that highly skeptical individuals sometimes struggled with overall recall completeness. They might overfocus on inconsistencies, leading them to withhold details they were not absolutely certain about, even if those details were accurate. They were more accurate on specific unprompted details, but sometimes less comprehensive in their full narrative. Their suspicious minds made them cautious, almost to a fault. The unexpected part was how many participants, when asked to describe their mindset during the recall task, independently referenced the idea of suspicious minds. Some even hummed or quoted parts of the Elvis song. It highlighted how deeply this particular cultural reference has ingrained the concept of doubt and distrust into the public consciousness. The study concluded that a skeptical disposition, while protective against certain memory distortions, also has its trade-offs. So it can make witnesses more resistant to external suggestion, which is valuable. But it can also lead to a more cautious, less comprehensive account of events. The suspicious minds hypothesis provided a useful framework for understanding the complex interplay between personality traits and eyewitness testimony, demonstrating that even a pop song can illuminate a cognitive bias. Can training programs for law enforcement or legal professionals leverage these insights to better assess witness credibility? What are the implications for jury selection if jurors with suspicious minds process evidence differently? Is there an optimal level of skepticism for accurate recall, or is it always a trade-off? How might cultural portrayals of suspicious characters beyond Elvis shape public and professional understanding of witness fallibility? Number 4, did Jailhouse Rock inspire music as behavioral control in prisons? The role of music in correctional facilities is a complex and sometimes controversial topic. It can be used for rehabilitation, therapy, or simply as background noise. But could a song like Elvis Presley's Jailhouse Rock, with its iconic imagery of prison life, have inadvertently inspired or at least provided a cultural reference point for the use of music as a tool for behavioral management? A 2007 socio-criminological study, The Sound of Solitude Music as a Control and Comfort Mechanism in Carceral Environments, explored this question. Published in the Journal of Correctional Practices and Ethics, the research was led by Dr. Anya Sharma, not the same as the previous Dr. Sharma, a common name, a prison ethnographer from the University of California, Berkeley. She conducted extensive fieldwork in several prisons across the United States, observing inmate behavior and interviewing both inmates and correctional officers. The study aimed to understand the multifaceted impact of music within prison walls. It looked at what inmates listened to, how it affected their mood, and how it was sometimes used by staff. And Jailhouse Rock, with its vivid portrayal of prison culture, the warden threw a party in the county jail, the prison band was there, and they began to wail, emerged as a curious, recurring reference point. Dr. Sharma found that while Jailhouse Rock was rarely played in its entirety on official prison radios, more often contemporary or less provocative music was chosen, its cultural shadow was ever present. Both inmates and guards sometimes reference the song in conversations about prison life. Inmates, with a wry sense of humor, might say things like, "Ain't no party here, just Jailhouse Rock." Guards might use the phrase in a jaded way, "Another day of Jailhouse Rock." The more significant, unexpected finding, however, was in the use of music in solitary confinement or segregation units, where controlled sound environments were sometimes employed. While not directly inspired by Jailhouse Rock, the song's imagery served as a cultural backdrop against which the reality of music in prisons was discussed. In some facilities, low-volume classical music or repetitive instrumental tracks were played during specific hours. The stated purpose was often to create a calming atmosphere, but Dr. Sharma argued it also served as a subtle form of environmental control. It provided a constant, non-negotiable sonic environment, disrupting silence while offering limited stimulation. Interestingly, several correctional officers, when asked about the purpose of such music, would sometimes joke, "We're trying to prevent any jailhouse rock breaking out," or "It's our version of the prison band." This showed how deeply the Elvis song had shaped the public, and even professional, imagination of prison life. It provided a ready-made cultural shorthand for discussing the realities of incarceration and the need for control. The study concluded that while there was no direct formal adoption of jailhouse rock as a blueprint for prison music policy, the song's powerful cultural resonance influenced perceptions. It inadvertently provided a popular culture lens through which the use of music in prisons, both for solace and for control, was implicitly understood and discussed. It highlighted the pervasive influence of cultural narratives, even on the highly structured and often grim realities of the carceral system. Do correctional facilities fully understand the psychological impact of the music they choose to play, or not play, for inmates? Could deliberately curated musical programs be more effective for rehabilitation or behavioral management, rather than just ambient sound? How do inmates reclaim or subvert the meaning of songs about prison life, like Jailhouse Rock, within their own carceral experience? Are there ethical boundaries for using music as a tool for behavioral control in prison settings, particularly when it might tap into deeply ingrained cultural meanings? Number 3, was the King's ransom note ever a real thing? Well, ransom notes are, by their very nature, designed to be intimidating, urgent, and often contain specific instructions. Their language is meticulously scrutinized by forensic linguists for clues about the perpetrator's identity, education level, and psychological state. But what happens when a ransom note, amidst its threats, incorporates elements of popular culture? Could a reference to Elvis Presley ever appear in such a grim context? A compelling case study from 2004, published in the Journal of Forensic Linguistic Analysis, delved into this precise scenario. The paper, The Pop Culture Cryptogram Analyzing Celebrity References in Threat Communications, was authored by Dr. Elena Rostov, a renowned forensic linguist at Georgetown University. Her research focused on the intersection of language, crime, and cultural literacy in written threats. The study centered on an infamous, albeit ultimately unsuccessful, kidnapping attempt from 1988 in the American South. A wealthy businessman's son was abducted, and a ransom note was delivered. The note, a typewritten document, contained the usual demands, threats, and instructions. However, it also included a single, seemingly innocuous sentence that puzzled investigators for months. "Don't be a hound dog, follow instructions." Forensic linguists immediately flagged this as an unusual deviation. The phrase, "don't be a hound dog," was a direct, unmistakable reference to Elvis Presley's iconic song. It stood out because most ransom notes aim for stark, unambiguous language devoid of such cultural flourishes. Dr. Rostov's team analyzed the context. Was it a taunt, a coded message, or a deliberate attempt to mislead? The perpetrator, a former employee of the businessman, was eventually apprehended through unrelated police work. During his interrogation, he confessed to writing the note. When asked about the hound dog reference, his explanation was surprisingly simple and revealing. He had grown up a massive Elvis fan. He said, "I just wanted to make them understand. Hound dog means someone who's always chasing, always nosy. I wanted them to stop chasing, stop asking questions, and just pay. It just popped into my head. It felt right." Dr. Rostov's analysis highlighted several critical points. First, the inclusion of such a distinct cultural reference, even if unintentional from a coded perspective, provided a unique linguistic fingerprint. It helped narrow down potential perpetrator profiles, someone likely of a certain age demographic who was familiar with 1950s rock and roll. Second, it demonstrated how deeply embedded popular culture can be in an individual's lexicon, even emerging under extreme stress or during the commission of a crime. The perpetrator's mind defaulted to a familiar, evocative phrase from his cultural upbringing. The study concluded that such pop culture references, even if seemingly random or personally motivated, are invaluable data points for forensic linguists. They offer insights into the perpetrator's cultural background, linguistic habits, and even their emotional state. The King's Ransom Note, as it was informally dubbed by the research team, was a prime example of how the king of rock and roll could unexpectedly surface in the most serious of criminal communications, providing a subtle but potent clue. It showed that even in the most calculated of crimes, a piece of cultural history can slip through. How often do criminals under pressure unconsciously incorporate cultural references into their communications? And how effectively do investigators recognize these clues? Could specific cultural references, like song lyrics, be deliberately used by criminals to create a specific perpetrator profile or to mislead investigators? Are there cultural references that are so ubiquitous that they cease to be useful as forensic markers? What training do forensic linguists receive to identify and interpret these often subtle, culturally embedded linguistic markers in criminal communications? Number two, did the Heartbreak Hotel coincide with domestic disputes? Social scientists often look for correlations between major societal events and shifts in human behavior. National tragedies, economic downturns, or even widely publicized celebrity deaths can sometimes trigger measurable changes in various social indicators. The death of Elvis Presley on August 16, 1977, was one such seismic cultural event. It prompted immense public mourning and collective grief. But could something as personal as a celebrity's death have a ripple effect on something as private and painful as domestic disputes? A 2012 sociological study, The Collective Mourning Effect, Celebrity Death and Public Order Deviance, published in the Journal of Social Anatomy, explored this complex relationship. Where Dr. Helen Park, a sociologist from New York University, examined public records, police reports, and emergency service calls from major U.S. cities during periods of intense collective mourning for iconic figures. And Elvis Presley's death was a primary case study. The study hypothesized that periods of collective emotional upheaval, whether celebratory or mournful, can temporarily destabilize social norms and individual emotional regulation. While many people process grief privately, a subset might experience heightened emotional distress, leading to increased impulsivity, alcohol consumption, or a breakdown in coping mechanisms. This, in turn, could manifest in increased rates of public order offenses and, more tragically, domestic disputes. Dr. Park and her team meticulously collected data from August 1977. They compared police reports for domestic disturbances, public intoxication arrests, and minor assaults in the weeks immediately following Elvis's death against control periods before and after. They controlled for day of the week, weather, and other typical variables. The findings were unexpected and somewhat sobering. In several major urban centers, there was a statistically significant, though, temporary increase in reported domestic disputes and public intoxication arrests in the 3 to 5 days following Elvis's death. The increase was modest, typically ranging from a 3% to 7% rise compared to baseline. It was not a nationwide surge, but a localized uptick in areas with high media saturation or a particularly strong Elvis fan base. The study suggested that the immense shared grief, coupled with the widespread consumption of alcohol and drugs to cope with grief or in tribute, created a volatile emotional landscape for some individuals. For those already in strained relationships or with pre-existing emotional vulnerabilities, the collective sadness and disruption of routine might have acted as a trigger. The iconic title, Heartbreak Hotel, though a song about loneliness in a different context, became a chilling metaphor for the underlying emotional turmoil that seemed to briefly grip parts of the nation. Dr. Park emphasized that this was a correlation, not causation. Elvis's death did not cause domestic violence. However, it seemed to create a specific social and emotional environment that might have exacerbated existing tensions for some individuals. It highlighted how even seemingly distant cultural events can have tangible, if subtle, impacts on private lives and local crime statistics. The collective experience of heartbreak seemed to manifest in more destructive ways for a vulnerable few. What other major cultural events or celebrity deaths have gone unexamined for their potential, subtle impacts on public order and private disputes? Understanding these collective mourning effects help social services prepare for potential increases in demand during such times. How do societies differentiate between healthy collective grieving and emotionally destabilizing periods that might foster deviance? Could cultural figures, even in their death, inadvertently reveal deeper vulnerabilities in our social fabric that we rarely acknowledge? Number one, can an Elvis impersonator effect lead to identity theft? The world of Elvis impersonators is vibrant, dedicated, and often full of genuine admiration for the king. Impersonators embody a persona, adopt a new identity, and sometimes live a life steeped in illusion. But what happens when that adoption of identity goes beyond performance? Could the psychological shift involved in becoming an Elvis, inadvertently lower inhibitions or blur ethical lines for certain individuals, leading to more serious transgressions like identity theft or fraud. A groundbreaking 2019 psychological study, the persona paradox, identity adoption and deviant behavior in mimicry cultures, explored this fascinating and somewhat unsettling question. Published in the Journal of Applied Psychology and Crime, the research was led by Dr. Evelyn Reed again, a common name, not related to the Graceland study author, a cultural psychologist from the University of Southern California. The study focused on individuals heavily involved in identity-based subcultures, with Elvis impersonators as a prime, high-profile example. The research did not suggest that Elvis impersonators are criminals. Far from it. The vast majority are honest, passionate performers. However, Dr. Reed's team hypothesized that for a very small, psychologically vulnerable subset of individuals, the continuous adoption of a highly charismatic, larger-than-life persona could create a dissociation from their original self. This dissociation, in turn, might lead to a reduced sense of personal responsibility or an increased willingness to engage in risky or even deviant behavior, perceiving it as part of the act or justified by their new identity. The study involved interviewing 150 individuals deeply involved in various mimicry cultures, including Elvis impersonators, historical reenactors, and cosplay enthusiasts. They administered a battery of psychological tests designed to measure identity congruence, moral disengagement, and perceived self-efficacy in different personas. They also cross-referenced public records for any minor non-violent criminal offenses, e.g., small-scale fraud, intellectual property infringement, related to their persona, minor identity theft among a subset of participants. The Elvis impersonator effect emerged as a specific pattern. Among a very small percentage of Elvis impersonators, less than 1% of the total sample, who scored exceptionally high on measures of identity dissociation from their original self, there was a slightly elevated incidence of minor offenses. These offenses often involved exploiting their Elvis persona for small financial gains, such as misrepresenting their credentials for bookings, or, in one documented case, attempting to use a fabricated stage name as their legal identity to open credit accounts. One specific instance involved an impersonator who, after years of living as the king during his performances, started believing his stage persona was his true self. He rationalized taking liberties with financial dealings, claiming Elvis wouldn't have to worry about this paperwork, or the king deserves this. He was eventually caught for minor credit card fraud, using a card obtained under a slightly altered version of his stage name. It was not a grand scheme, but a subtle erosion of boundaries. Dr. Reed stressed that this was a rare phenomenon, not representative of the broader impersonator community. However, it illuminated a crucial psychological point: continuous, deep immersion in an adopted identity, especially one of great power and influence, can lead to a disengagement from the moral compass of one's original self. The charisma of the adopted persona, the Elvis in this case, could be used as a shield or a justification for actions that the individual would not commit as their true self. The study concluded that understanding the psychological nuances of identity adoption in cultural mimicry is vital for both psychology and criminology. It showed how the allure of a powerful, culturally revered identity, even when adopted for performance, can, in rare instances, lead to a blurring of ethical lines and a path towards deviant behavior. The Elvis impersonator effect revealed a peculiar and unexpected way the king's legacy could, for a very few, intersect with the complexities of identity and crime. How can individuals involved in deep identity adoption maintain a healthy separation between their persona and their true self, especially when the persona is powerful and charismatic? Are there specific psychological vulnerabilities that make certain individuals more susceptible to the persona paradox? What are the ethical implications for the culture industry if the adoption of a celebrity persona can, in rare cases, lead to identity-related crimes? Could therapeutic interventions be designed to help individuals manage identity dissociation when it borders on deviant behavior?